We now turn to the NBA in the city of Philadelphia. Part of the process is over, although it's safe to say it wasn't quite the ending 76ers fans were hoping for. Brett Brown was fired after the 76ers were swept by the Boston Celtics after 7 years with the team. The first 4 seasons were resoundingly unsuccessful, but he eventually had the promising duo of Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid to work with. But after back-to-back Eastern Conference semifinal appearances, the 76ers could not take the next step, and Brett Brown is now unemployed. So, Cody, how did the 76ers get to this point, and what other changes should they make?
Well, they got to this point through what we call the process, or what they called it anyway, and definitely predates the drink of wisdom because it started back in 2013. And really, we have to understand like how Philly got here, right? And basically, the idea is that Philly, they were struggling long before the process came along. Really, ever since Allen Iverson carried probably one of the worst finals teams ever to the big dance in 2000, and then was promptly beat 4-1 by Kobe and Shaq. They've only won 2 playoff series since then, or between then and 2013, and both those ended in second round exits with a couple other first round exits sprinkled in. So 2013, Sam Hinkie and crew just said, screw it, we're just going to tank, and we're going to tank in a way the league has never seen before. I mean, to the point where it actually was prompting the NBA to study tanking and go, man, do we really need to come up with some kind of anti-tanking measures? Because it was, if anyone remembers, it was pretty brutal, like how bad Philly was. And Brett Brown was hired as part of that tanking venture, and they were 47 and 199 in those first 3 seasons, back when the NBA did play all their games. And, to be fair to Brown, he wasn't expected to do much during this time, right? He had to develop the talent they had and not set the building on fire, and that was pretty much his only 2 job check marks. We fast forward a couple years, and we do get Joel Embiid, former 3rd overall pick. He finally makes his appearance 2 years after being drafted, and they go 17-28 with him in the lineup before a knee injury finishes that season. That was a spark of, hey, maybe things are turning around, because for the Sixers, 17-28 was basically a miracle. And then the following season, Embiid gets healthy, and Simmons, who actually sat out his first rookie year as well, he gets on the scene in 2017, and everything changes in an instant for the 76ers. They go 52-30 that season in 2017. They get the 3 seed in the East. They beat the Heat. They do get bounced by the Celtics in the second round. However, they didn't stop there. They come back for the next year. They get Jimmy Butler. They trade for Tobias Harris, and this team goes 51-31. They beat the Nets in the first round, and they take the eventual champion Toronto Raptors, led by Kawhi Leonard, to 7 games. And we all remember Kawhi's, game-winning shot in the corner, which did ultimately end that series. But that quelled some of the Brett Brown concerns at the time. There was already some musings of him maybe getting moved on for somebody else, but his, coaching in that series, I guess they thought was good enough to give him another season. So this season comes along. Jimmy Butler does walk. They do sign Al Horford for about $1 billion, but the record was disappointing. The team never really seemed to gel this season. Horford never really got his footing with the rest of the team in the lineup. And after that injury to Simmons in the bubble, they get swept by Boston, and it's in and out. So when you look at it overall, I think the thing with Brett Brown is it's hard to pin everything on him. No coach probably deserves all the blame for their team. Obviously your players have to play, your GM has to get you the right tools, etc. But this season was a colossal letdown. And anytime a team has a colossal letdown of a season, it's always going to blow back on the coach. When the expectations are finally high and then they're not met, it's hard to imagine anything besides a massive slew of injuries or the coach being at fault. And again, some of this you can say, well, Brett Brown's got a really unorthodox team. You have a giant post-up center. You have a 6'10" point guard who literally cannot shoot past 10 feet. You mix in Horford being out of place. You got your bench is like a collection of a lot of these one-trick pony guys. Most of them aren't shooters, which you really need on this team. And it didn't really work. It's not a raw talent issue. It's just a piece fitting issue. But at some point, you have to blame Brett Brown for some of this. And I think where it comes in is the defense. This team should have made their money on defense, and they didn't. And it was mostly a matter of effort and consistency, 2 things that coaching should provide, and they didn't have that. And I think that probably was the final, nail in the coffin, per se, for Brown. And I think this shouldn't be the only change. I'm not sure if Elton Brand's the right call. He's already come out publicly and said he's not going to trade Embiid or Simmons, which obviously that's before any offers are on the table. But I don't think that duo is going to work, and it's not really a hot take to say that. I think most people believe that one of those guys will be traded. And I think the thing really is that both those players have a pretty high value to a tremendous value to the right team and the right suitors, and Philly could get quite a haul for either player. I've seen some ideas of maybe Simmons going to even somewhere like Golden State for the right amount of picks and players and, going around all those shooters. I mean, both guys in the right system should be able to flourish and be top 10 players, but they've got to be in the right system. And I don't think Philly has that with these guys playing together. So, I think the bottom line with Brown is, he proved he could float and achieve what he could achieve with the talent he has, but great coaches do more than what they have talent wise. And Brown never did that. And when things got tough this season, he actually underachieved with the talent he had. And that's not going to cut it for any coach in any professional sport. So he's out the door. And I think that Elton Brand should be behind him. And then one of Embiid or Simmons for the right trade package.
Well, when you go, thank you for the history lesson was just beautiful, by the way. Very well broken down. I did not expect to be taken all the way back to the turn of the millennium.
The 76ers, may I go back to I could have gone further if you want me to.
Okay, now let us take you back all the way to Dr. J. We'll be back shortly after we get through that. But no, listen, Brett Brown, do you remember when the process was actually taken? By process, I mean the license to lose on purpose, because that's what this was. Everybody, including Greg Popovich, was saying, I feel bad for Brett Brown because what he's being subjected to. You recall the only player that really made it out of there and was a contributor in the future teams that were actually kind of good and, made the playoffs in recent history was Robert Covington. Remember that? That's the only dude. Really, the only dude that made it out of there. There could be a couple more, but Robert Covington really the only player of substance that kind of was in those tanking seasons that made it out. And no, Brett Brown, he's not responsible for those first 4 seasons. But what he is responsible for, and it's always, and the NBA is especially hard on coaches. I mean, we don't forget just a few years ago, a man won Coach of the Year, and they said, get out, Dwayne Casey. No, by the way, we can't get mad at him because then Nick Nurse comes in and he does the thing. We can't get mad at him.
It worked out.
Look, relevant to expectations, the 76ers did not take the logical next step. And sometimes it's hard that's a hard line because it's not always the progression is so smooth. Like some teams, they make it to a point, they take a step back and then they make it. Maybe next year will be the year for Philly. I don't believe that, by the way. But, it's not always a logical progression, but yet, I mean, you got to pay the price at some point. Two straight Eastern Conference semifinal appearances. This year, I was very, very vocal. I believe Drink felt the same way. We expected 4 teams to be leading the charge. We were looking at the Lakers, the Clippers, the Bucks, and the 4th team was the 76ers. And very early on, it was pretty evident that Philadelphia was not together. They were not put together as well as we thought they were, and they did. And Elton Brand went against the grain. He went big when a lot of teams are going small. You bring in Al Horford. You re-sign Tobias Harris. Drink always brings up a good point. I don't know this for a fact. I don't know if Jimmy Butler said, no, I just want to leave, or if Philadelphia just said we'd rather have Tobias Harris as opposed to Jimmy Butler. If that's the case, that's an absolute mistake. I thought it was a mistake then, and it's definitely a mistake now as we look at what Jimmy Butler is doing with the Miami Heat. But then again, I don't know that for sure. That is just, if that's what happened, that was a colossal mistake. We also can't forget J.J. Redick. You don't bring him back. Robert Covington, again, another guy you let go. All those guys, well, Redick and Covington in particular, you need shooting. You got to have some level of shooting. Think about Philadelphia's starting lineup this year. Ben Simmons, Richardson, Horford, Harris, and Embiid. Where's the shooting? And not to say that none of those guys can't shoot. Everybody except Simmons can shoot the ball. But when you look at somebody and say, what's your role? Nobody's going to say shooter for the first thing for any of those guys, right? Embiid, you think of him as, your classic big man. Get people on the block and go to work. Horford, he's kind of your classic pick and pop guy, he can pop, and also defensive anchor, that type of thing. Tobias Harris, Swiss Army knife, does a little bit of everything. Josh Richardson, on the ball defender, classic tough guy on perimeter defender. And we know Ben Simmons, shooting would be the last thing anyone would talk about when it comes to Ben Simmons. The point is you have to structurally, this team was not built well, especially when you look at the modern NBA. You have to have some level of shooting. They didn't have it. I say that many a time. When your best short shooter is Furkan Korkmaz, you got some problems. You got some problems. And not only that, your max players that you signed in the offseason, you re-sign Harris, you go get Al Horford, they didn't perform as max players. Not even close. And so when you have that, and then you have Ben Simmons, you had the injury. I mean, that happened. So, but let me tell you, we don't believe for 1 second if Philadelphia has Ben Simmons that they beat Boston. I don't see that. I mean, they be better, but I don't see how they win that series, even if he's available. I think this was I think Brett Brown. I think they had to let him go. I mean, at some point you've peaked with who you have, and you've been in the same place for 7 years. And let's be honest. I mean, I think Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, I don't think either one of those guys are particularly easy to coach. I mean, we know how vocal Joel Embiid is. We've seen just a myriad of inconsistent performances. I mean, we got, the inside the NBA crew calling him out, seemingly on a monthly basis. And then we'll see, a little spike in production. Then next thing, you're putting up one of those horrific stat lines that make you say, really, is this the guy that we think's a top 10 player in this league? And then Ben Simmons, I hate to just harp on the same thing, but I mean, you can't be a point guard in this league and be completely unwilling to shoot the ball. And please, spare me social media and these sports websites, spare me with the Ben Simmons videos at the Y or wherever he's at shooting jump shots. It's meaningless. So when you look at who should be the next coach, I don't know if there's a coach out there for these guys. Phil Jackson ain't coaching anymore. I mean, that'd be the one guy I'd look to that can say Phil can figure it out. Phil can take any level of talent and mesh it together. We've seen it just countless amounts of time. And then you talk about they've elected, it seems, to move forward with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. I think at some point, I think this was the season to where you try it again with those two. But yeah, I think at this point, I would let one of them go. I really would. I think there comes a point where you've spent this amount of time together, and not only has Brett Brown peaked with these guys, but maybe they've peaked as a duo. I don't know if it gets any better. I mean, this was a season we thought it should all come together. But again, you're absolutely right to talk about guys like Elton Brand. Elton Brand did not have a good first year as your GM. The moves he made in the offseason, I thought the Al Horford move would be good up front, but that's not how it turned out. It looks like a colossal mistake. It looks worse than the Tobias Harris contract. I don't think anyone could have predicted that Al Horford would look this level of out of sorts on this team. It was an absolute disaster. But I think more changes need to be made. I'm not gonna say Elton Brand should go. This was Elton Brand's first year as general manager, so that's a pretty hard line for me to kick a guy out of here after just 1 year. I think you let him try to continue, and you let him pick his coach and see what they make of things. But I think it is a little bit harsh to point the finger at Elton Brand, although he does deserve blame for this season. I just don't think he should lose his job.
Yeah, that's fair. I was, for some reason, I thought he was there 2 years, but you're right. He's only been there 1. That's rough. But I think with the Joel Embiid thing and the Ben Simmons thing, the last thing we'll say is, when we're talking about trading one of them, it's part of it is that the duo doesn't seem, like you said, it seems to have peaked. But also, you're not retooling that roster without getting rid of one of them. Like, you're not going to convince anyone to take Tobias Harris or Al Horford for anything other than pennies on the dollar. And there's no other – you're going to have to just run it back with those same guys. I mean, yeah, you make a few bench changes or whatever, but, I mean, how much different can you make that roster keeping those two guys? That's your ammunition to rebuild the roster as you see fit. So, a lot of decisions to be made in Philly.